The Torvaxis Empire's grip on the galaxy was an iron fist wrapped in the velvet of fear and oppression. For centuries, they had crushed countless species, bending them to their will with their advanced technology, and humanity had been no exception. Earth was a dying husk, its once thriving cities reduced to ghost towns, its people scattered across the galaxy like grains of sand in the wind. In the dark corners of the galaxy, the human race had been reduced to little more than slaves, exploited for their labor, their ingenuity, and their spirit. Elise Caridian was one of the millions of humans who had survived under the suffocating weight of the Empire. She worked in the belly of a Torvaxis warship, an engineering drone for the machines of war. The warship, Dominion's Resolve, was a gleaming behemoth of twisted metal and humming engines. The Torvaxis overlords demanded perfection, and every day, Elise and others like her labored under the watchful eyes of their alien masters. There was no room for failure, no chance for error. Even the smallest mistake was punished swiftly and brutally. Elise's hands were raw, her eyes bloodshot from long hours of toil. She had lost count of the years she'd spent on this cursed ship, but the bitterness of her servitude never dulled. She had once been part of a thriving world, a vibrant species that had built monuments to the stars. But now she was nothing more than a cog in the machine of an empire that saw her kind as inferior. Her memories of Earth were distant, fading as time wore on. She had not seen her family in what seemed like an eternity. The air in the engine bay was thick with the smell of oil and burnt circuits. Elise moved with methodical precision, adjusting the energy conduits that powered the ship's engines. Her work was thankless, but it kept her alive. The Torvaxis overseers were ever present, lurking in the shadows, their reptilian eyes watching for signs of disobedience. The slightest hint of rebellion would be met with swift retribution. As Elise twisted a wrench to tighten a bolt, her thoughts drifted back to Earth, what remained of it. The planet was a forgotten world now, a testament to humanity's subjugation. The skies had once been blue, the oceans teeming with life. Now only desolation remained. The Torvaxis had used Earth as a testing ground for their weapons, bombarding it with energy pulses that had crippled the planet's ecosystem. Humanity had been broken, scattered, and enslaved. But there was one thing the Torvaxis had underestimated: human resilience. Elise had seen it in the eyes of the others. They had not forgotten who they were, and deep within her, the spark of defiance still burned. Her moment of reflection was interrupted by the sharp, metallic hiss of the elevator. The Torvaxis officer, Lieutenant Voker, stepped into the bay, his armored form casting a long shadow across the floor. Elise straightened, her posture rigid, though her heart thudded painfully in her chest. Voker was known for his cruelty, an unrelenting enforcer of the Empire's will. His presence was a constant reminder of the power they wielded over humanity. Caridian, Voker's voice was a low growl, his alien accent thick. "I trust you are completing your work with the required efficiency?" He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing as he looked at her. Elise swallowed hard but kept her voice steady. "Yes, Lieutenant. Everything is in order." Voker's eyes flicked to the data pad in her hand, scanning the readout. He didn't need to check, he already knew the numbers. The Torvaxis were efficient that way. Every movement, every action was monitored. And yet, there was something in the way Voker looked at her, something that made her skin crawl. He leaned in closer, his breath cold against her ear. "Don't forget, human. You are nothing without us. We are your masters. Without the Empire, you are nothing but a broken species." Elise's pulse quickened, her jaw tightening. He was right in one way. Without the Empire, they were nothing. But there was more to her than the broken shell she had become. She could feel it, deep inside her, waiting to explode. "I won't forget," Elise said through clenched teeth. Her gaze met his, her eyes sharp with an anger that she had spent years hiding. "I won't forget." The Torvaxis officer smirked, satisfied with his show of dominance, and turned on his heel. "See that you don't," he muttered before disappearing back into the corridor. Elise let out a shaky breath. She stood still for a moment, fighting the surge of rage that rose within her. She had learned long ago to bury it deep. Anger was dangerous, rebellion even more so. But today, something inside her had snapped. She had spent too many years bending under their rule, too many years watching her people die at the hands of the Empire. She glanced around the engine bay, where humans worked in silence, heads down, eyes averted. They were all trapped in the same prison, but there was something in the air today, a sense of possibility, a flicker of hope that hadn't been there before. Elise's hand slipped into her pocket, where a small, encrypted device lay hidden. A message had arrived earlier that morning, an invitation of sorts. It was from someone she didn't know, someone who claimed they could help. The message had been brief, but it was enough to ignite a spark of curiosity. The Hidden Star Collective. There is a way to end this. Join us, and together we will make them pay. She stared at the device for a long moment, the weight of her decision pressing down on her. Joining this collective would mean death if she was caught. But staying here under the thumb of the Torvaxis would mean the same. At least this way she might have a chance to do something, to fight back. She took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. Enough was enough. The Torvaxis had taken everything from her people. But they had not taken her will to fight. The revolution had begun. Elise Caridian's heart raced as she made her way through the dimly lit corridors of the Dominion's resolve. Every step was calculated, every motion controlled. She had never felt the weight of her decisions more acutely than she did now. The encrypted device in her pocket felt like a burning brand against her side. The message was clear. Join us, and together we will make them pay. The Hidden Star Collective. Elise had never heard of them before, but the words they had sent rang with an undeniable truth. There was a chance, an actual chance, to fight back, to tear down the empire that had enslaved humanity for so long. But there was no turning back now. She had already made the choice. She slipped through a service hatch and into a maintenance tunnel, her destination clear. The rendezvous point. A hidden room deep within the ship, where she would meet the resistance members who had sent the message. She had no illusions that it would be easy or without risk. The Torvaxis had eyes everywhere, and the slightest mistake could cost her life. The tunnel was silent except for the echo of her footsteps, the air stale with the scent of old machinery. As she walked, her mind raced with thoughts of what lay ahead. Would the collective really be able to end the Torvaxis reign? Or was this just another false hope? Another cruel trick designed to keep them docile? As she rounded a corner, she froze. Ahead, a shadow moved. She instinctively pressed herself against the wall, her breath catching in her throat. Torvaxis guards patrolled these corridors frequently, and their presence here was no accident. Her heart pounded in her ears, and for a brief moment, she considered turning back. But no, she had made her choice. The guards' footsteps grew louder as they approached. Elise's hand went to the small hidden blade at her waist, a tool she had learned to use out of necessity. She waited, every muscle tensed, as the figures drew closer. Then, as they passed by, she slipped from the shadows like a ghost, moving silently behind them. She could hear their conversation, their reptilian accents a low hum. Their words were incomprehensible, but she didn't need to understand them to know they were oblivious to her presence. The guards continued their patrol, unaware that they had just walked past the very person they were sworn to control. Elise's pulse slowed, and she exhaled slowly, her grip on the blade relaxing. She had made it past them, but there was no time to celebrate. The rendezvous point was just ahead. As she approached a nondescript door at the end of the tunnel, a voice, low but unmistakable, spoke to her from the shadows. "You're late." Elise tensed, then turned to face the figure emerging from the darkness. It was a human, his face hard with experience, his eyes sharp. He was tall, with a scar running across his cheek, a reminder of the price of rebellion. "Dane Voris," Elise said, recognizing him immediately. He was one of the most infamous leaders in the resistance, rumored to be a former military commander, now a smuggler and insurgent. His reputation was legendary. "I had to be sure you were coming," Dane said, his voice tinged with suspicion. "You could be one of them, a spy." Elise met his gaze without flinching. I'm not a spy. I'm here because I want to end this. The Torvaxis Empire has enslaved humanity for long enough. It's time to fight back. Dane studied her for a moment, his eyes calculating. Then slowly he nodded. All right, you'll fit in just fine. He stepped aside, allowing her into the hidden room. The space was cramped, but it was alive with activity. Several other humans were gathered around, working over maps and data screens, planning their next strike. Elise could see the fire in their eyes, the same fire that had been dormant in her for so long. This is Mara Lauren, Dane said, gesturing to a young woman hunched over a console. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, her face set in concentration. She's our best hacker. If there's a way to bring the Torvaxis to their knees, she'll find it. Mara looked up, giving Elise a brief, assessing glance. Nice to meet you, she said with a small nod, then returned to her work, her focus unshaken. Elise nodded in return, feeling a sense of solidarity she hadn't known in years. These people weren't just survivors. They were fighters. We're going to need more than just a few sabotages, Dane said, his voice dropping to a whisper as he moved closer. The Torvaxis have built their empire on the backs of species like ours. We hit them where it hurts, inside their systems, their fleets, their entire infrastructure. But we can't do it alone. We need to rally the rest of humanity. Are you in? Elise looked around at the faces of those in the room, each one a reflection of the same anger and desire for justice that burned in her chest. There was no turning back now. Yes, Elise said, her voice firm. I'm in. The room seemed to come alive at her words, a quiet murmur of agreement spreading through the group. The first spark had been struck. The rebellion was beginning, and nothing would stop it now. The Resistance's early victories were small but significant. A blown-up supply depot here, a disabled Torvaxis comm relay there. Elise had hoped that these hits, seemingly insignificant on their own, would sow the seeds of rebellion across the galaxy. But she knew better than to believe the Torvaxis would sit idle for long. It wasn't long before they responded. The first sign came when a series of encrypted messages flashed across the Resistance's secure networks. Dane Voris was the first to notice, scanning through the transmissions with grim determination. His face paled as he read the messages. The Empire's come after us, he muttered, his voice tight. And they're not playing games. He looked up at the room full of Resistance fighters. Everyone fell silent, sensing the gravity of what Dane was about to say. There's a fleet on the way. Full force. They're targeting the mining colonies where we've been hiding out. Elise's stomach twisted with dread. The mining colonies had been their safe haven, a place where the Resistance had regrouped, shared resources, and trained. If the Torvaxis destroyed them, they would be cut off from the galaxy's outer rim, a place where humanity still had some influence, some power. Dane slammed a fist on the table, his voice low but fierce. We don't have much time. We need to evacuate, and we need to do it now. Mara, sitting at her terminal, tapped a series of commands into the console. I'm setting up a false signal. Give us a window to escape, but we'll need to move fast. The room buzzed with activity as the Resistance fighters sprang into action, preparing for a hasty retreat. Elise felt the pressure of the moment weigh heavily on her. The Torvaxis were coming, and they would not be merciful. As the minutes ticked away, Elise's mind raced. Their plan was to split up, sending groups of fighters to different locations, each with a set mission. Some would disrupt Torvaxis sensors to delay the fleet's arrival. Others would hack into their communications grid, scrambling the enemy's strategy. And a few, including Dane, would lead a diversionary assault to draw the Empire's attention away from their true objectives. But Elise's task was different. She had been assigned to an elite team with Mara and a few others, those with the skills to infiltrate a Torvaxis supply vessel and extract critical intel on their next move. It was a dangerous mission, one that might not succeed. But it was their best shot. Ready to move, Mara said, breaking through Elise's thoughts. She handed her a small data pad, which flickered to life. We're in. The escape began in a flurry of activity. Resistance fighters loaded into their ships, the air thick with tension. Elise's group boarded one of the smaller ships, an older, less advanced model that the Torvaxis would overlook. The ship hummed to life, and they shot off into the vast expanse of space. For a moment, Elise could almost forget the weight of what was happening. But that illusion didn't last. They were being hunted. As they approached the Torvaxis vessel, Elise's pulse quickened. The massive warship loomed ahead, its dark hull covered in scorch marks and battle scars. It was an intimidating sight, every inch a symbol of the Empire's might. "Stay focused," Dane's voice crackled over the comms. "We don't have much time. Mara, can you break through their security systems?" Mara's fingers flew across her console, her face intense with concentration. "Already working on it, but I'll need a few more minutes." Elise glanced out of the cockpit window. The Torvaxis ship was now only moments away. They would have to act fast. Without warning, a new voice broke through the comms. A voice that sent a chill down Elise's spine. "Target acquired. Prepare to engage." It was the unmistakable voice of a Torvaxis fleet commander. The Empire had already locked onto them. "Brace for impact," Dane shouted, and before anyone could react, the ship rocked violently as a salvo of plasma fire tore through the void. Elise's body slammed against the seat, her hands gripping the console as the ship lurched. The once-safe mining colonies were no longer an option. Now they were in the middle of a battle they could not win. "Hold on," Dane barked, his hands tight on the controls. "Mara, get us through that breach." Mara's fingers worked furiously, her voice strained. "I've got it. Just a few more seconds." The ship shuddered again, this time from an explosion too close for comfort. Elise could hear the dull thud of impact in her chest, as though the very air had been punched out of her. But then, with a sudden shift in the noise, the comms crackled, and Mara's voice came through, triumphant. "Got it. We're clear." Elise exhaled, relief flooding her body, but there was no time to savor it. The ship veered toward the Torvaxis vessel's underbelly, a narrow gap where they could slip in undetected. As they entered the vessel's docking bay, Elise's gaze locked onto the ship's control panel. They had done it. They were inside. But the hard part was only just beginning. Their mission was clear. Infiltrate, steal the intel, and get out. But with the Empire's wrath closing in, Elise knew that nothing would be simple again. The war had just escalated, and humanity was now a target. The quiet hum of the Torvaxis warship filled Elise's ears as she stepped onto the cold, metal floor of the docking bay. Her heart thudded in her chest, each beat a reminder of the stakes. The mission was simple in theory. Infiltrate, gather intelligence, and leave. But simple was a luxury they couldn't afford. She moved swiftly, her footsteps muffled by the thick air in the docking bay. Dane Voris and Mara Lauren were already ahead, coordinating their movements with precision. The Resistance ship they had stolen was now hidden in a shadowed corner of the bay, safely out of sight. But time was running out. The Torvaxis fleet wasn't far behind, and the longer they remained on this ship, the greater the risk of being discovered. "Stay sharp," Dane's voice crackled over the comms. "Mara, start cracking their systems. Elise, you're with me. We're going to the control room." Elise nodded, her hands gripping the small energy weapon at her side. The Torvaxis ship's corridors were eerily quiet, with only the distant hum of machinery to break the silence. Their mission was to breach the central command hub and extract whatever data they could on the Torvaxis fleet's movements. A single piece of intelligence could be the difference between life and death for the rebellion. As they moved deeper into the ship, the tension in the air grew thicker. The walls seemed to close in around them, and every flicker of light felt like a spotlight, a signal to any lurking Torvaxis forces that something was amiss. Mara's voice came through the comms, her voice calm but strained. "I'm in. I've bypassed their security. We've got access to the command network." Elise exhaled in relief, but Dane didn't slow his pace. They were close now, too close. The heart of the ship loomed ahead, and with it, the core of the Torvaxis Empire's military might. If they succeeded, they could cripple the Empire's ability to respond to humanity's resistance. If they failed, Dane paused at the door to the control room. He glanced at Elise, his expression grim. This is it. We get the data, we get out. No exceptions. Elise nodded, swallowing her fear. They were in this together now. There was no going back. The door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing the nerve center of the warship. Torvaxis officers moved swiftly around the room, their reptilian eyes sharp as they monitored the ship's systems. A few of them glanced up at the intruders, but Elise and Dane were already moving, their training kicking in. Dane took out the nearest officer with a precise shot to the head, while Elise incapacitated another with a swift strike to the throat. The room fell into chaos, the officers scrambling to respond to the breach. But Mara's voice echoed through their comms once more. I've got what we need. Downloading now. Elise and Dane covered her, taking down the last of the Torvaxis officers before they could alert reinforcements. Elise's pulse raced, her body moving on pure instinct as she scanned the room for any threats. Time was running out. The download completed, and Mara's voice crackled in their ears again. I've got the fleet's coordinates and more data on their next target. It's a human colony. They're planning to wipe it out within the week. Dane's eyes darkened. We've got to get this back to the fleet. Fast. But as the words left his mouth, the doors to the control room slammed shut. Elise's breath caught in her throat as the familiar hiss of the Torvaxis alert systems echoed through the ship. They had been found. Move! Dane shouted, and without hesitation, Elise followed him, sprinting for the door. But the Torvaxis were already on them. A barrage of plasma fire erupted, forcing them to take cover behind a console. Elise's heart pounded in her chest, but her mind was clear. They had the data. Now they just had to survive long enough to get out. Mara, get to the ship, Dane barked, his voice strained with urgency. We'll hold them off. Elise turned to him, fear flickering in her eyes. No, we stay together. But Dane shook his head. You don't have a choice. Get the intel back to the resistance. If I don't make it out, it's on you. Reluctantly, Elise nodded, clutching the data pad tightly in her hand. The resistance needed this information, and no matter the cost, she would ensure it got into the right hands. Go! Dane yelled, pushing her toward the exit. Elise sprinted, the sound of the Torvaxis pursuit echoing behind her, but she didn't look back. She couldn't afford to. As Elise made her way through the hallways, she could hear the sounds of battle raging behind her. The Torvaxis were closing in, but she had one chance, one shot to get this intel out. She pushed herself harder, the weight of the data in her hands reminding her that the fate of humanity rested on her shoulders. She reached the docking bay and sprinted toward the stolen ship. She didn't hesitate as she jumped into the cockpit, quickly firing up the engines. As she blasted out of the Torvaxis ship's bay, she caught a glimpse of the warship fading behind her. But Elise knew that this victory, this small act of rebellion, was just the beginning. The Torvaxis empire would fall, but it would take everything humanity had to bring it down. And they had only just begun.